Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. As Spencer said, my name is Steele Fitzwater. I am currently a candidate for a performer diploma in solo performance here at the IU Jacob School of Music, where I recently graduated with my master's degree in voice as well. Tonight, we have a very exciting event for you with a wonderful, diverse group of panelists from both Indiana University and beyond. Some brief introductions for our panelists, starting with Bruno Sandes, a great friend of mine. He is known for his ability to engage deeply with any audience. His warm and refined and mature voice has been seen on the Indiana University stage many times. He recently finished his master's degree here at IU, where he also completed his bachelor's studies, and he is currently pursuing his doctorate as well, studying with Carol Vaness. He has a long concert and art song repertoire, and he has sung a vast and diverse number of roles, including Figaro and The Barber of Seville, Giorgio Germont and La Traviata, Belcore and L'Elisir d'Amore, and the title role of Mozart's Don Giovanni. He has given recitals throughout Europe, North America, and South America, and was chosen as the grand winner of the 2014 IU Latin American Music Center Recording Competition, where he recorded an album of love and folk-inspired Brazilian songs, receiving many enthusiastic reviews. He was also one of the winners of the Heart of Europe Singing Competition and a semi-finalist of the 2018 List International Competition. Currently, he serves as an associate instructor of voice here at IU Jacob School of Music and is the assistant director for the Carol Vaness Graduate Opera Workshop. Next, we have Tatiana Lokina. Pianist Tatiana Lokina was born in Moscow, Russia, in a musical family. At 7, she entered the School of Music in Moscow, and at 11, she gave her first solo recital in that same city. She is a winner of numerous Russian and international prizes and has performed at Moscow State Conservatory, the Paul Dukas Conservatory in Paris, France, Music Hochschule in Hamburg, and has appeared in concerts in Russia, Italy, Austria, Germany, France, and in the United States. She received her master's degree in collaborative piano at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida, with Professor Lisa Leonard, and she currently is pursuing her doctorate of music in collaborative piano at Indiana University, studying with Professors Ann Epperson and Kevin Murphy. She is very passionate about vocal repertoire, including both opera and art song, and she consistently performs with singers and is an alumni of Songfest Summer Program and Fall Island Vocal Arts Seminar. In February of 2019, she appeared as a rehearsal pianist and continuo player in the production of Handel's opera Giulio Cesare here at IU, and is very passionate about early music, which is a minor field in her studies. Next, we have Sophia Hunt. Brazilian-American soprano Sophia Hunt is currently pursuing her master's degree at the Curtis Institute of Music, where she holds the Herzig Family Fellowship and studies with IU professor as well, Carol Vaness. This season, Sophia sings Vitalia in Mercy, a film by the Curtis Opera Theater based on Mozart's La Credenza di Tito, and is performing the title role of Donizetti's Anna Bolena as part of Curtis's Virtual Opera Scenes program. She recently made her Opera Philadelphia debut, performing a program of songs entirely by female composers. She is passionate about recital work and has frequently collaborated with pianists Michael Eliazon and Grant Lunig in song programs as part of the Curtis Student Recital Series and Curtis on Tour. She has sung recitals and art song masterclasses through Songfest, the Art Song Preservation Society of New York, and the Highlands Chapel Series in Seattle, Washington. Her recent song performances include George Crumb's Apparition and 3 early songs, Mahler's Des Knaben Wunderhorn, Copland's 12 poems of Emily Dickinson, and various Brazilian art songs. Next, we have Madison Shindel. Madison Shindel is a Brooklyn-based musicologist and soprano pursuing her PhD in musicology at the City University of New York Graduate Center. Her PhD research centers around the leader of Alma Mahler, Schoenberg, Schubert, and their intersection of cultural disability studies, gender, and sexuality in art song. Madison is also pursuing a certificate in Women's and Gender Studies while at the Graduate Center. In completing her master's in historical musicology at Goldsmiths, University of London, Madison's dissertation, Why Winter Came for Women, explored the exclusion of women and the performance tradition of Schubert's Winterreise. A portion of her dissertation was published in the centennial issue of the Schubertian and is featured on the Insights portion of Winterreise.online. And while not in the library, Madison sings soprano in the contemporary music ensemble Cantori New York, performing new and neglected choral works. Now, over Zoom. And finally, we have Duncan Hutzol. Duncan Hutzol is a music writer and producer, currently completing a Bachelor of Science in Voice Performance and Arts Management at the Indiana University Jacobs School of Music under the tutelage of Peter Volpe. In August 2020, he published a book called Voices of Tomorrow's Songs, a vision statement for American opera according to young professionals in the field. His writings have been featured on Opera Innovation, Backseat Mafia, Indie Shuffle, Twisted Spruce, the Indiana Daily Student, and featured on WIUX, where he hosts a weekly music program. He serves as the artistic director for New Voices Opera, as well as the vice president of event planning and promotion for the interdisciplinary network of students in music. Duncan has produced several virtual music events, including New Voices Opera's fall exhibition, What's Going On?, a panel discussing merging music and activism, and A Light of Hope, a virtual recital fundraiser. We are so fortunate to have the talents of so many diverse people in this panel, and so many of whom are both friends of mine and excellent colleagues. The first of those who is Bruno Sandes. I know Bruno from the opera stage. We have sung in many productions together, and when his bio says he is an electric, warm performer, it absolutely means it. But what is so passionate about Bruno is his interest and love for not only opera, but also for song. So Bruno, can you tell us a little bit about that and also about this excellent recording project that you got to do?
Absolutely. Thanks for the words, Steele. I was almost like, oh my gosh, someone should pay him to say all that. Anyway, my passion for art song came out of literally, I guess, necessity, especially because as someone who came from Brazil, it's way easier to do concerts and recital there using like short art songs instead of presenting opera, because most of the places we cannot even like put together opera, like full stage opera performances. But then when I came to the US, especially because I was so well known for opera productions, and then so the only contact with art songs became the classes of song literature that I had to take as an undergrad at IU when I was doing my bachelor's in voice performance, and then in my master's, but also now doing the doctorate, and of course in different levels. And throughout all these years, I think I became a little frustrated because for my undergrad, we were like, oh great, art song literature. So we start talking about Lida and then French melody and then Italian songs. And I'm like, great, when they're gonna talk about Brazilian art songs or Latin American art songs or anything that's not in the spectrum, it didn't happen. And then that was for my undergrad. And I was like, okay, that makes sense because we have to be exposed to what is like traditional. And then for my master's, doing my master's for song literature, one more time, we kept talking about Lida and we kept talking about French melody and we kept talking about Italian art songs and some Icelandic and some a little bit, but at the very end of the course. And we never end up discussing about this huge repertoire that there is up there of art songs. And then I'm like, okay, maybe for the doctorate, things would be a little different because it's another level. And then one more time, the same problem happened. So when we were talking about innovation in art songs, I was like, it's funny because we think about innovation, but innovation comes with changing, of course, a reality that's happening. And sometimes we connect innovation with things, of course, that's new. But then what about the stuff that's actually old that should be included? So the old actually becomes a part of innovation if you change the way things are done. So the more art song classes I took, the more frustrated I got, especially as someone who is deeply passionate about, in my case, Brazilian art songs, because it's so diverse, one of the largest countries in the whole world. And of course, and then we have at IU, the Latin American Music Center, which holds the largest archive of Latin American music in the world for the 19th century. And yet, we're not talking about that kind of repertoire in our art song classes at IU. So there's a lot of problems that came up, like I was noticing in terms of academia. So how can we change and innovate in academia where the same pattern is being kept throughout all these years? So does it make sense still?
I completely agree with you. I think that it's really an issue that we face, that the repertoire of song is very diverse, but things that we perform very often are not as diverse. And Tanya, I know that you are also a champion of another group of underrepresented songs. Being a fabulous collaborator and also a Russian, can you tell us about your experience with Russian art song and Russian repertoire?
Yes, I've actually been fascinated by what Bruno just said, because I was thinking, what is innovation for me, and how should I, start my speaking about my ideas. And I actually thought exactly the same thing. Innovation for me is not only something that is done completely new compared to what has been done all these years, but also is something like when people dare to go out of their comfort zone and do something that not everybody does, or that is not that commonly done. So I am luckier than Bruno, and Russian art song repertoire and opera repertoire is represented in other countries. However, it sounds, when I come to a different country, that Russia doesn't really have any other composer rather than Rachmaninoff, Tchaikovsky, Mussorgsky, a little bit differently pronounced, but yes, people are aware. And yet we have so many Russian composers, both old and that were actually founders of Russian art song, and composers that are still alive and are very prolific, and composers who just passed away recently and lived during the Soviet time, that were incredibly important in my country, and that are either not known at all in any other country, or maybe just the last name, or maybe just a couple of songs. So that's one thing that I came across to when I started working here with singers. And another thing is that every time I've been coaching Russian a lot, Russian diction for singers, and every time someone brings me yet another Spring Waters or another Lenski aria, the first statement would be, "Oh, this is my first thing," or maybe not even first thing that I sing in this language, and I completely don't understand. I feel that it's for me like a different planet, and I'm so afraid, and I know that I will never learn the alphabet, but could you please teach me how to do this one thing? And I've been thinking, what can I do for people to first understand that this is not a different planet, this is much closer to even just reading Russian is much closer to reading English that everybody thinks. It's much easier than to read Korean for us, and or Japanese for that matter. And to introduce people to singers to the repertoire that is not known here at all. So I developed my Russian diction course specifically for singers and coaches, vocal coaches. And what I'm doing there is I'm combining learning the Cyrillic, the Russian alphabet, with learning Russian art song from the very beginning. Not learning, I'm not reading the lectures about the history of Russian art song, but we are listening and we are discussing and we are comparing recordings of composers who were founders of Russian art song, such as Glinka and Dergamyshsky. And of course, I am promoting as much as I can Russian composers that are not known here at all. One of them, Giorgi Sveeridev, is actually the composer. My dissertation is about him, about his art songs, and he was in art song field and in vocal field, he was as important as Shostakovich. And they lived in similar in the same time, and he passed away in the 90s. And he wrote so many extraordinary art songs that are constantly performed in Russia. And even Gary Armin, whose knowledge of art song is pretty much endless, he hasn't heard about this composer. So I just wanted to share a couple of names. Giorgi Sveeridev is one of them, and he has two very important cycles. One of them is called Russia Kasta Drift. It is written for baritone. So he was composing for particular people normally, and one of them was Chворостовsky, so most of his male songs are written for baritone mostly, and then he worked with Elena Obraztsova, who is mezzo-soprano, so his songs that are sung by women are mostly for mezzo-soprano, but they are also available in different keys. So I am going to send here a couple of names. Giorgi Sveeridev, Russia, Cast and Drift, and Petersburg is another cycle. Extraordinary music in the text, in the meaning. And Valentin Silvestrov is another one who is less well known even in Russia, and he has the cycle of songs. It's actually two cycles called silent songs, and they are literally silent. They are very quiet. It's an hour and a half of music that never goes past mezzo piano, maybe. There is so much to discover, and I just make sure in this diction course that I'm teaching that after taking it, students don't think anymore that they cannot read Cyrillic, that they cannot sing in this language, and that they can only choose between 15 songs that everybody knows.
That's really so fascinating. And I think, you know, Tanya, what you did by creating a Russian diction course that was geared specifically towards singers is really the definition of innovative, where you found a need and then created a product to fill that need. Also, Sophia, you are of Brazilian heritage as well. So you also come from this realm of having a culture where their songs aren't as well represented in the, you know, the typical classical canon, but you also are an avid recitalist of various other kinds of music. How do you go about performing that music? And can you tell us how you make those programs and about your recital career?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to get to talk with all of you. Yeah, so I'm also Brazilian, but I grew up in the US, and all of my classical training has been here. And it actually wasn't, I mean, I was almost finished with my bachelor's when I met Bruno. And Bruno, we went to Aspen together, and he was the one who introduced me to all of this Brazilian art song. So I grew up around Brazilian music at home and with family in Brazil, but I had never even heard of most of these songs other than the ones by Villa-Lobos, you know, which is the only composer that seems to really exist outside of Brazil. And there are just so many thousands and thousands of amazing, amazing songs. So for me, that's been really exciting to discover those and to perform some of those. And my favorite thing as a performer is introducing audiences to pieces that they don't know and making them look at the standard repertoire in a new way. And that to me is how we can be innovative in art song. It's the way that Tanya and Bruno are talking about introducing them to pieces. And I love doing new music as well. And music, like Bruno said, old music that just hasn't been performed, music by, you know, female composers in the 1600s were writing music that just nobody knows about. And so nobody performs it. And for me in programming, a big way that I have found to program these pieces is through the poetry. Like I did a program of all music by female composers. And I think that if you take an audience and tell them, okay, you're going to listen to an hour of music that you've never heard before by composers you've never heard of, I think that can be really overwhelming for the audience and for the performers. Like, how do we even start? But if you find poetry that's meaningful to you as a performer and that can be meaningful to the audience, it's then the perfect way to draw people in. And that can be poetry in English or, you know, translated into the language of the audience. So that's been a big part of it for me, and also looking at standard repertoire through the lens of the poetry as well. I did a project with the Copeland 12 Poems of Emily Dickinson, and at the time that he wrote the songs, the only poetry he had access to was essentially a censored version of Dickinson's poetry. And so my pianist and I went back and actually changed some of the music to reflect what she actually wrote. And in explaining that to the audience and explaining why that project was important to us, I felt like it really engaged them in a new way. So I think that the poetry is something that is really instantly relatable for a lot of people, and that can then draw them into repertoire that they might not know, and draw them into repertoire that they might know, but in a new way that can be really exciting.
That's so excellent. And, going off of that to Madison, you have so much background in the study of gender and art song. And in particular, this wonderful paper on Winterreise and the exclusion of women's performance in this song cycle. Can you give us a little insight on what you think could make art song more innovative and on your studies and your research?
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Steele. And yeah, like Sophia said, I'm so excited to be here with everyone tonight. So yes, I'm a musicologist, so that gives me this privilege of interacting with these art songs from kind of the safety of a library rather than having to get on stage in front of an audience like my colleagues here. But the piece which Steele's referring to was a portion of my master's dissertation, which, yeah, centered on the exclusion of women from the performance tradition of Winterreise. Kind of looking into these forgotten performance practices, going back and recounting like historic performances by women of Winterreise, but then also pinpointing these traditions which historically homogenized the genre and kind of made it okay for only men to sing the cycle. But also in that exploration of these traditions, I found things that we would find innovative nowadays. So, they would spray perfume between each song in lead performance in Berlin in like the 1890s, or they would sing behind plants to kind of give the aura that this higher being was singing. So there are some things that I think as musicologists and as performers we can go back to and draw, well maybe not spraying perfume, but we can really draw from these historical performance traditions and find innovative ways to perform these traditional works. In my own musicological research, primarily, I prioritize these narratives of gender, sexuality. Recently, I've been focusing on disability and the intersection of art songs, specifically infertility as a cultural disability topic. But overall, I find that musicological scholarship surrounding art songs specifically has been leaning in this more hermeneutic direction, which I find innovative and really refreshing. Like earlier today, the gender and art song panel I went to, there were just such interesting conversations that arose and ensued. And, those are the things that excite me and engage me as a musicologist. And it really says something about the innovation that's happening in the academic realm as well as the performance realm. And, there's been an influx of research surrounding colonization and race, disability, gender, sexuality. So I feel very lucky from my chair getting to experience all this innovation from an academic perspective, and then going to see a show and seeing the theory put into praxis in performance. It's quite magical.
That's so wonderful. And I think one of the reasons I'm so excited about this panel is because we don't only have performers, but we have scholars. And we have not only scholars, but also producers and entrepreneurs. And Duncan, I think you are just a perfect example of an entrepreneur in music. I know him from my voice studio. We share the same voice teacher here. But Duncan, yes, please tell us more about your opinions on art song and productions of new music and also new voices opera.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. And I do bring a distinctly different perspective on a lot of these issues. While I have performed and still do to this day, I don't consider myself a performer as much, and my interaction with art song is not as much now in my personal performance of it, but rather in my production of these works. So I've been focused a lot on how we present art song as well as who we're presenting art song to. And this ties into my work with New Voices Opera, which is a student-run opera company dedicated to commissioning new works from young, unproven composers, people who haven't had a main stage production staged yet. And we go and foster these long-term partnerships through mentorship and workshopping of these works. And it often starts with art song. One of the highlights of our season is our fall exhibition, where we solicit open submissions this year from all across the world to you be the potential next composer for our main stage production. And we got all this art song, and we were able to gauge how well people were able to, create dramatic intent within their music and set text and create an innovative and engaging musical language, all of that sort of stuff. And in my focus of producing, a lot of what I've been focused on is who we're presenting these to, who we're presenting these works to. It's the audience. In, I think, every panelist's case, we have considered deeply the audience that we're performing to, or the audience that we're providing some sort of innovation for in creating these products. I mean, Tatiana saw the lack of Russian diction and Russian representation, filled that gap. Bruno and Sophia both saw that gap in Brazilian art song, filled that gap. Sophia talks about, it can be daunting to have an unproven, unknown program, but connecting through text, knowing that that's what the audience will connect with. There's that element. And then with Madison talking about digging back in these innovative practices, seeing what audiences have reacted to before, gauging how they can react to it now, that's another innovation that's being filled. And so everyone's doing incredible work. And then my job is to connect all those strands and come out with a pretty little package that you can subscribe to for $129 a season.
Duncan, thank you so much. And it's so wonderful, like I said, to have this wonderfully diverse group of people here. And now I would love to open this discussion up to some, not only conversation, but also questions. So each of the participants in the Zoom meeting, please do feel free to send us questions, send us things you have for our panelists, for myself even, so we can open up a topic of conversation. And to start that off, I want to go all the way back to Bruno. Bruno, you brought up this really, really wonderful point about innovation being not only things that are new, but things that are old and not done, things that should be done. And I think there's a really wonderful conversation to be had about how we do this as scholars, as producers, as performers, and also as educators. Do you think that new works or old works of underrepresented communities should be championed by academia, championed by performers, or ideally a combination of both?
Still, I personally believe that it could be a combination of both, but I would not throw like the blame at anyone, but I would say that academia has a strong role in spreading knowledge, of course, because that was the first thing that frustrated me. How do we have all these amazing repertoire out there? And it's funny because Sophia mentioned even Villa-Lobos. We literally got to the end of the semester and a professor said, okay, and then there's the rest of repertoire. Take a look at your own pleasure and your time. And I was like, wait, we spent 2 months just talking about German lieder. And then you have all these, which I think is very important. But then when you add different degrees in academia talking pretty much about the same thing, and then you just feel like, wait, there's such great repertoire out there. And then if a teacher actually exposes students to this kind of repertoire, and I think there's a big chance that students can say, wow, this is awesome. Actually, it's because using Brazilian repertoire as an example, the language is not hard in terms of, because a lot of people say that Brazilian is like the child of French and Italian with a Spanish cousin. So it's like it. So we are exposed. There are no different sounds pretty much than French and Spanish and Italian. But at the same time, no one talks about it. So when people talk Russian, Tanya brought up the question about the diction and Russian, people thinking it's really hard and all that. But then, if that's the reason people don't do Russian repertoire, then you have Brazilian, the language is technically more accessible and easy, and we're still not doing that either. So the question, I believe, if professors in academic would show more, expose more, to the students, I believe that there are way more, there's a better chance that this repertoire will be known. And there's so much great stuff out there. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just, for me, it's so sad that, especially when I do recitals, when I sing, and people, American, especially in the US, people are like, I've never heard this before. This is so amazing. I could not understand a word, but that was lovely. And they are humming the tune. And so there is a connection. People actually identify, they love the music, but they don't have an opportunity to hear that very often. So I think there has to be like a little shift in terms of like, okay, we presented the classical, the lieder, the German, the French, the Italian. Let's explore all this repertoire that's out there. But in my opinion, there's a case of like, okay, this is easier. Everyone knows this, so we're not going to talk. But I know there are professors, even at IU, who are exploring new repertoire, and like they're engaging and asking students to do things that are different, and that's contemporary repertoire. But I'm also like advocating for going back and taking a look, especially in South America. There's so much great stuff up there, and there's such a huge community in the United States, and even here we are not doing this kind of repertoire. So I hope that makes sense.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And Sophia, Tatiana, both of you as performers and recitalists in different aspects, what do you think about this issue? What do you think the best way forward is to diversify this repertoire? Either one of you to take that.
I'll just speak, adding on to what Bruno was saying about academia kind of introducing students to this repertoire. I think it's also equally important that there be the space for them to be supported in choosing to sing it, because I've had so many people over the years like reach out to me and say, I discovered this one Brazilian song and I really want to perform it, and I've tried to coach it with these people and nobody can help me pronounce it. Can you send me a voice memo speaking the language? Which is like the simplest thing in the world. And the diction rules are not complicated. It wouldn't be hard for a coach at a university to learn how to pronounce Portuguese by looking at it. But I think when you're dealing, especially with young students who are overwhelmed and have so much to do, and they're trying to put together their graduation recital, that like that extra element of, oh, this is going to be difficult and I'm going to have to go out of my way to figure out how to do this, will be enough to deter them from doing it. So I think not only introducing students to the repertoire, but having the support to figure out how to perform it is really important.
Should I add to the same? Yeah. I think that I would agree that I think academia has the most amount of tools to help the student, because academia and so many art song festivals where there can be classes that will introduce songs, that can be classes for singers of diction. And I think that we are in this lucky time when people are ready, are open to changes, are open to discuss topics. Like we just had a performance with Steele where he sang this amazing cycle that rose awareness for AIDS. And people right now are interested and open to know about these things, to perform art about these topics. And I think that this is a very good time, actually. And if, I don't know, there would be an opportunity for classes that are not required, but that would provide the tools for people to learn about the material and to learn the languages or diction or anything of that matter. If that will be provided for students, I believe that students now are ready to start exploring that more.
Absolutely. And we have this wonderful question here in the chat. What do we think that our generation will bring to art song? What do we think our lasting legacy will be, or what do we hope that it is? And the wonderful thing about being students is that each one of us in this panel are on the cusps of beginning our careers, of really beginning to make our mark on the music world as a whole. And our legacy, what our legacy is so important. Madison, what do you think about that? If you could mark your legacy in 15, 20 years from now, what would you want? And what do you want to see our generation do?
Oh, that's a tough one. I definitely want to see our generation make, this, what we call art music, more accessible. I consider myself to be a public musicologist, really caring about not so much the hoity-toity musicology, but really trying to let the layperson understand what I love so much about this music, and especially about art song. So I've always, when I come across someone that doesn't know anything about art song, I say, okay, what's your favorite singer-songwriter? Is it, Frank Ocean? Okay, let's pair that with an art song, maybe in English that I think they would like, or even in German or Italian or, any other language. So I hope that our generation finds a way to make this music accessible, because at the end of the day, it's not so different from someone sitting with a guitar and singing about the girl that left them, or, wandering in a winter storm, which I hope no one's doing right now. But I really do hope for accessibility to be our generation's legacy, in addition to, this deconstruction of a hierarchy of what we consider to be art music, because of course the reason it's not accessible is because it's tied into this very classist legacy. So that's my hope.
Absolutely. And I think that idea of accessibility ties into your studies on the intersection of art song and disabilities. Can you tell us a little more about that? I think that is personally so fascinating, because that is never a topic that I've seen discussed. Yeah, please, I'd love to know some more.
Yeah, sure thing. So there's kind of two different directions that musicologists and music theorists take when talking about cultural disability studies in relation to music and art song, but specifically music. They can look at the composer, and a composer who has a disability, such as many of the composers I've studied in my time with German Lied, Schumann, passing in an institution, Schubert, who had syphilis and was also gay, which at the time would have disabled his existence in Vienna. All of Wolf, there are so many composers, Beethoven, who was deaf, so we can look at their music and read their music in a way which considers their disability status. But then, of course, we can also look at different aesthetics in their music and kind of pair those with different disability topics. There's a great theorist, Tobias Siebers, who talks about the disability aesthetic and how it's related in art, especially expressionistic art. So we could do that with song and really consider, our body's embodied carnal musicology in the way that we interact with these pieces and the way that we analyze these pieces. You're muted.
Thank you so much, Madison. Another great question we have in the chat right now is talking about experiences with commissioning works or developing works with living composers, and what do we look for in those collaborations? Duncan, as the president of New Voices Opera, I think that is so perfectly suited to you. What do you look for in these collaborations? And what areas of innovation do you focus on?
Well, I can speak from a couple of different areas. One area is our current production, which is of John William Griffith's The Jungle, based on the Upton Sinclair novel of the same name. So we were all set to perform it in a typical proscenium setting in front of a live audience on April 27th, 2020, and then a little something got in the way. So since then, we've been able to step back, the entire creative team, and rethink about, how can we tweak this? How can we present this? And we're in constant communication with John about the creative liberties that we're allowed to take with his work in the presentation of the ultimate final product. And having that open communication line is really central towards having a healthy relationship and having a healthy final product. And another example, which is detached from my work with New Voices Opera, but it's a good friend and colleague of mine, Caroline Goodwin. She just performed her senior recital, and she commissioned a fellow student composer, Alex Tedro, to write a song cycle for her based on some poetry that she had found and she had really resonated with. So in developing that relationship, she saw that, and tying back to the earlier question about, making our impacts as early onset professionals, as you might say, um, finding those gaps and finding what other people need and what other people want, and just finding that correct synergy with a collaborative partner. There are certainly collaborations that won't work out for whatever reason. I've had my fair share of them, and ultimately it's nothing personal. It's just that on a professional level, the working styles, the compositional styles don't gel well. That doesn't mean you can't put out a great product. It just means that it's going to take more energy and more effort in order to get that done. So to answer the question of what we look for someone who's really not easy to get along with or agreeable, because that might come off as we can walk all over you, but a composer who is flexible, but also steadfast in their vision, because once you get both sides aligned on the ultimate vision and the ultimate goal, it makes all the process fall right into place.
Thank you so much, Duncan. And to our next question, how do we engage audiences in a virtual platform? This has been at the tip of everyone's minds and everyone's tongues since the COVID-19 pandemic has begun, with moving to virtual classes, virtual performances, virtual diction courses even. What do you guys think is the way to do it? Do you think that we'll be virtual from now on in some capacity? Do you think that there are some silver linings to this pandemic, that we now have a society that is used to being in these virtual conference rooms and is adapted to technology in such a way?
I'll start off by saying, I think what this pandemic has given us is a silver lining, in that it's forced the classical music industry to play about 50 years of catch up in the span of 10 months. The technological capabilities that we have now and the presentation formats that we have now within the classical music realm are things that other performing organizations, other artistic media have been exploring since the turn of the millennium. So in that realm, there is definitely a silver lining to this. As far as keeping audiences engaged, I personally wrestle with this as a producer, because I understand that there's such an ephemerality to live performance, that there's something about being in that hall and something about being in the presence of these artists that can't be matched through a screen. But also balancing that with the fact that a majority of the media we consume on a daily basis comes through screens. I would wager over 95% of all the media we consume comes through some form of screen. That's not a hard and fast number. I just like to spit out fast statistics, but if you say it confidently, they'll believe you. So ultimately, as far as will we be virtual going forward, it would be haughty for us not to. I think what we're going to see is more of a smoothly integrated fusion of these digital formats. It's almost like we popped the clutch on a manual car and we kind of lurched into second gear, but now we should be able to shift more smoothly in between them going forward.
Thank you so much, Duncan. I think we can all agree that as musicians, the virtual format has been both a challenge and a change, but that reaching audiences can still be our #1 goal. And we have another interesting idea in the chat that is, do we think there are other ways that technology in the classical music or art song world need to catch up with each other in? Madison, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think technology is helping us? And do you think that we're behind, coming from your points as a scholar and also as a performer?
I don't know if we're behind. I think, performing songs written in 1824 is a bit behind, which we're all doing naturally, I suppose. But it's kind of funny. I have a funny anecdote with the contemporary music ensemble I sing with. We've continued to have rehearsals and performances where we will record something or have a piece that we recorded in a past season, and we'll play it on Zoom and lip sync to the music. And our audiences, which there have been audiences, luckily, it's very strange, I believe, because, and I see a question here about making the voice more intimate, how virtual singing can be this intimate relationship. And in a way, I have found that technology has made things more intimate. People can be in the comfort of their own homes. They don't have to run to the one train to go uptown to Lincoln Center to see a show. So there's this intimacy that's there. There's an accessibility factor which is there as well. In terms of a lot of these concerts have now been free, which is great. You don't need tickets. But also people who previously couldn't leave their homes due to disability, age, whatever it may be, now have access to this music. The Met was streaming free operas for a while, and I got to see so many great operas. It was wonderful. As a student, you rarely get that. So I wouldn't say the classical music world is behind. I would say that, or the art song world is behind. I would say that we can be a bit more intuitive and just aware of the ways that we can be more inclusive and accessible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think something else in the classical music world that is, again, on everyone's minds are the way that we, for a lack of better terms, stay relevant. How do we compete with the media and the vast amounts of screen time, Duncan, like you said, that we have? Is live performance as important as it used to be? And are there ways that classical music is falling behind? And are there ways that we can change that? Bruno, maybe your thoughts on this.
I think throughout this whole discussion, I've been just thinking about the idea of what the future looks like for us as performers and also as an audience member, because I was thinking about my experience and how much I miss the audience. I miss their faces. I miss the reactions. And it's funny because I've done performances online where, like, through IU, we've been doing operas online, and there's just like the professor sometimes in the theater. So usually what we were used to, the audience being laughing, and it's really hard. How do you do comedy without an audience? So it's almost like we are learning how to adapt to maybe a different kind of and learning new skills, forced pretty much. But I believe that the future. That's a question that I've asked myself, like, how can we bring younger generations, because it's so much easier to just be in front of a computer and being like where they have all these insane graphics or something for kids, or like technology is so ahead. And how do you bring kids to hear classical music or doing a recital and they feel like, oh, this is really cool, I want to do that again? So I've been always thinking about, especially like now with a little baby, I'm like, what will be a song recital in 20 years? Because when you talk about like recitals that were given, and it's really easy to find, just type on YouTube, when you say like just a song recital, and everyone like 30 years ago, and everyone's so well dressed, there's used the suit and the bow tie, and women with all these beautiful dresses. And nowadays we have recitals, and we have friends who are there with their shorts and sandals during summer. Like, things have been changing. So the audience has been changing. The connection between performer and audience has been changing. So I wonder how far technology can be engaged. And we've been just today blessed with all Jeremy voice performances. So we see all how the new and the traditional can actually meet, have like a particularly a particular point. But just adding to the discussion, our whole lives, as I'm just calling myself a little old, but like when we are staging something and we have directors, we're like, oh, you're acting for the camera, you have to act big. But guess what? Now there are cameras on you, literally. So the idea of intimacy can be way better in terms of like, there's literally a camera so close to you that can get your facial expression. So you don't have to be as big if the performance is being live streamed. So I just think I threw a lot of ideas out there, but I'm excited to see what the future holds because of things like this summit that's happening right now, where people are actually discussing this kind of ideas. So
thank you so much, Bruno. And as we are ending our time together today, I want to go back to the question about what we think our generation will give to art song and what we hope our legacy will be, not only as students, but as this diverse group of people entering the world. And I would love to hear from each of you on this, and maybe just a few short sentences if you can tell us your thoughts. Bruno, do you mind starting again?
Sorry, Stu, my internet, my connection cut. Can you just repeat the last question? Sorry.
Yeah, of course. Just going back to our generation and our legacy that we would like to leave, in a few short sentences, if you could tell me what you would like that to be for you.
Sure. I think we can bring way more the idea of vulnerability and accessibility, just going with, and in terms of making, and it's something that has been said so many times. I see all my colleagues saying, oh, I just want to make classical music accessible. And the question is like, how do we make freaking classical music accessible if we keep doing the same things? So I think the idea for the future and the legacy is literally how can we innovate, how can we keep a tradition, but bring in and pretty much put in our stamp in everything we do. That's something that I'm passionate about doing. Whenever I perform anything, is almost like, okay, here I'm bringing all my experiences and put my stamp in the music that I'm doing. And it's been very inspiring to hear all my colleagues with so many innovative and different ideas for what the future holds. So I'm actually really excited to see what's coming.
Awesome. Thank you, Bruno. Tatiana, how about you? What would you like your legacy to be?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned already, I would like our legacy to see our legacy as people going out of their comfort zones and exploring the repertoire that represents topics that is discussed not only in music but in the society and in what's going on in the world, on the one hand. And I think another thing, when I hear you mentioned how do we compete, and for me this is also part of the legacy, actually, to not compete with other genres, and because I think that when we compete, we are trying to prove something, and actually that brings us, that takes us away from the purpose. So I think that the legacy in the art song is to find for each of us what we are very passionate about, and to do that no matter what. I, for example, am not trying to convince myself that if I am an incredibly good pianist or I have a lot of knowledge about Russian art song, I will be as famous as, I don't know, Beatles is. Of course not. It's not about that. It's finding something that you are so passionate about that you cannot not share with people who will be interested, and there will always be people who will be interested. And just to do that to the best of your ability and to the, according to your passion is, I think, what the legacy of every artist should be.
Thank you, Tatiana. Sophia, how about yourself?
Yeah, I love that. I love what Tatiana said. I think for me, like, I fell in love with art song because I think there's nothing, it can be so beautifully intimate in a way that opera in some ways can never be. Like, you're in this tiny concert hall and you have the people right there. And I think that as we are looking for these different ways of being innovative in art song, that's something that's really important for us to remember as our legacy that we leave behind, right? If we're going for, I just came off of filming a movie adaptation of an opera. And if we're looking at something like The Wandering, we have all of these opportunities to do things that we can't do on stage. You can have that extra intimacy. So like leaning into that, because we have that chance with movies. If we're doing innovative programming, I did a recital a few years ago on like a certain inauguration night a few years ago of songs of peace and hope and resilience. And, I had so many people come up to me afterwards and say, oh my God, I didn't even know that that's what I needed, but I didn't know what to do tonight. So I came to a recital, and like hearing that poetry made a difference for me. So the people who are not necessarily music people who we want to bring in, I think it's finding the ways to touch them in a way that they don't necessarily realize that they need, and that you can't get just from, a movie. It's just different. It's different than being in a concert hall with somebody singing a song to you. So I think remembering that at the core of all of the innovation and why we do this as musicians, and introducing people to that and to what makes us love this.
Thank you so much for that. And you never know what people need when they walk into a concert hall, when they come to an audience. And that's, I think, one of the most special things about what we get to do. Madison, I know I already talked to you about this question, but if you have any final thoughts, I would love, love, love to hear them.
Yeah, really quickly, I'll just say that as I was talking about accessibility before, but I really hope that accessibility comes from a deconstruction of these power structures that have kept classical music inaccessible. In the academic world, this deconstruction is being done, of course, through like academic papers, which aren't accessible in the first place. But works such as, Phil Ewell's Music Theory in the White Racial Frame is a great place to start. And then in performance, of course, it's done through things such as The Wandering and the other projects that my colleagues tonight have talked about. So as a musicologist, you hope that the theory in those research papers kind of goes into praxis, and you see that enacted on the stage and in the recital hall and in those lessons at every music institution. So that's just really the hope.
Thank you so much. And finally, on to Duncan, your thoughts?
Certainly. I think what we've all presented so far as our closing statements have been really powerful examples of how we can be innovative as performers and creators of art song. And with artists, we have so much intention behind each choice we make, each, program that we create. But sometimes, and not because of our own volition, we don't have that same intention in how we consume art and how we consume media. So if I were to say one thing about what I would like my generation to leave behind, it would be an ethical consumption of art and an ethical consumption of media, taking the time to think, what do I really need right now? And sometimes it's just a friend's marathon with a tub of Ben and Jerry's. But other times it is really taking a deep dive and exploring outside of our comfort zones, like Tatiana was saying. Sometimes it is songs of resilience during a time when we feel so defeated, like Sophia was mentioning. And if we take the time to be more ethical and more judicious in what we consume and how we consume it, then I think we'll make a much more lasting impact for the future, for both creators and for the art form as a whole.
Thank you so, so much for that, Duncan. I want to give a big thanks again to this entire panel. This is where the round of applause should happen. But as we know, as we are on Zoom, all I can do is give you my thanks. It has been such a pleasure being here tonight. And to echo one of the comments we have, go forth and continue your eloquent advocacy. It can't be said any better than that. It's been my pleasure moderating this panel, and now I'm bouncing back to Colin.
Thank you, Steele. And Madison, Sophia, Duncan, Tanya, Bruno, thank you so much for that wonderful conversation. if the future of art song is in your hands, I think we are in good shape.